both names in various places. So I'll very often refer to both names. Ideally, we'll talk a little bit about why to upgrade, and we'll get into some of the different techniques for doing upgrades themselves. We'll talk about some of the things to be aware of, and this is really where Steve is going to help us out as well, because since being in a support organization, he can identify exactly what some of the troubles that organizations run into. We will walk through actually just a basic high-level flow of what an upgrade actually entails, and then we'll open it up, like Kristen said, for questions. So that said, why upgrade? There's a couple of different reasons why you may want to upgrade SiteMinder or see a single sign-on. The first of which is, depending on what version you're on, there's a lot of new features that have been added over the last couple of versions. Things from like our enhanced session assurance with device DNA feature, which does browser fingerprinting to help secure the SiteMinder session against theft, to authorization policies based on risk score. So now you can authorize users based on what their risk score is when they log in, and not just static authorization based on if they're in the right LDAP group or whatever. A better identity mapping across multiple different user repositories, especially if you're trying to map a user from multiple different mappings going on. The REST APIs for SiteMinder to allow authentication and authorization to occur via an API as opposed to having to write a custom agent plugin. And most recently, unlimited federation, including WS Federation for Office 365, and unlimited access to the CA SSO Access Gateway, which is formerly the Secure Proxy Server. Those are for customers that are running on 12.5.1 or higher. So there's a lot of new benefits that have been put into the product recently. Also, we try our best, and we're working very hard to make sure our software is bug-free as possible. But the reality of life is that the software sometimes people run into bugs. What we have published is our new break-fix strategy for fixing bugs. You see the URL there on the screen. And the more recent versions of SiteMinder actually are much more frequently, we are releasing bug fixes or CR fixes much more frequently for the newer releases of SiteMinder. So if you're on the newer release and you find something, you're going to get it fixed that much quicker. Lastly, we try to have the positives, but also SiteMinder 12.0 we have sent out an end of service announcement of that. That particular version goes end of service July 2016, excuse me. Didn't want to scare anyone. So that is also something that's happening for people that might be running on SiteMinder 12.0 as well. So there's a lot of different reasons to upgrade. And there's a lot of different ways to upgrade as well. We can upgrade really in two main categories, and these are reflected in the SiteMinder documentation on the wiki.ca.com site. But basically, you can do an in-place upgrade, which is really just taking what you have now and running the new install scripts on top of different components and actually updating the components in the existing environment. You can also do a parallel deployment where you really decide you want to deploy on new systems and install the newer version of SiteMinder in the newer servers and maintaining single sign-on and eventually phase out the old stuff. Both are perfectly acceptable ways of doing it. Both can be done without taking any system outages or entirely system-wide outages of the environment. So both can be done while you're up and running. And there's different permutations here. I see different organizations for different reasons wanting to do some of these in different ways, or even doing hybrids of in-place and parallel together. Some don't want to, for example, you may not want to upgrade your web agents. Some do want to upgrade agents. Some might want to do in-place upgrade of web agents, but parallel upgrade of the SiteMinder policy server and policy store infrastructure. Some might say, you know what, Aaron, is we're going to the next version of SiteMinder. We don't want to just dump all of our policy data we currently have into the new environment. We want to migrate applications over more in a one-by-one manner so that we basically can go through and clean up our policies while we're in that process as well. Especially that's very effective when you have a bunch of old data that's in there that you don't believe that you're currently using. So there's different ways and different hybrids and things like that. And this is where sort of the art and the upgrades actually sort of take place, is figuring out how you want to do it in place or parallel, because your mileage may differ. Pretty much the same upgrade steps exist for SiteMinder. If you're upgrading to SiteMinder 12.52 from SiteMinder 12.0, 12.5, or 12.5.1, if you're still using the end-of-service SiteMinder 6, that upgrade procedure is different, and I'm not going to cover that in depth here in this call because SiteMinder 6 is an end-of-service version. We're always going to talk a little bit about parallel and in-place upgrades. Regardless of which way you're going, there's some certain things to be aware of. And Steve, did you want to walk us through some of these?
Sure. You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So, my name's Steve Lavoie. I work with the CA SiteMinder CASSO support team. Some of the things that we found have been, I wouldn't call it the biggest challenges, but certainly things that need to be thought of and planned on ahead of time are things like any custom code that you have in your previous environment that's integrated with SiteMinder. In many cases, that code need to be recompiled with updated SDKs. And we always strongly urge that custom code be tested prior to upgrade, just to ensure that there's a smooth upgrade process. Proper testing on your side is performed. The same thing goes with any global delivery modules that you have in place. You typically want to ensure that the global delivery modules that you're running are compatible with the version you're upgrading to, or if there's an upgraded version of the global delivery module, then that needs to be downloaded and integrated as part of that upgrade plan as well. And again, we can't emphasize enough the need for testing when you're dealing with things like custom code or global delivery modules. Parallel upgrades can potentially introduce some gotchas, and again, it's probably extreme. What we run into a lot of is people have their environments up and running and configured for a lengthy period of time, and in many cases, what we hear is, well, these were set up, long before I got here, for example, and people may not be aware of tuning settings, tweaks, changes, configurations that may have been done in the environment to either accommodate some unique process or some customization. These simple things like changes to registry settings, some specific settings configured within applications. When you're doing in-place upgrades, that's typically not a problem. When doing parallel upgrades, of course, we need to make sure to configure our target environment or our parallel environment with those same or similar settings that we configured in our previous environments, or else we may reintroduce the same problem that necessitated that tweak, fix, or what have you to begin with. So those are some things we really want to make sure that we're thinking about when we're doing an upgrade, not just running setup and hoping for the best.
Yeah, and I'll just add there. I mean, that's one of the most common ones that I see a lot as well. For one reason or another, you made a change in, let's say, the registry setting to ABC. I don't even know. Over the years, that was forgotten, and now you do an upgrade on the new server, and you know what? You're experiencing the same problem they experienced 2 years ago, which is when you put the registry setting happening on that machine in the first place. What ends up happening is, in many cases, it gets escalated back at CA, and people start saying, CA, you reintroduced this problem. And, in all fairness, the parallel environment didn't pick up the existing settings off of the other server. We never said it would, but that's a step that many times people actually forget. Steve, you want to talk about policy object integrity?
Sure, that's a great next topic. So one of the things we run into periodically, particularly when people are upgrading from older versions like R6, for example, in older versions, the policy server didn't always do a great job of maintaining internal or referential integrity of the data. Now to say corruption, and we sometimes hear that word corruption, that's really an extreme. What we're really talking about here is where we have objects that have children child objects that have parents. They typically cross-link each other in the database. They'll reference the object ID of its child and parent. You see this in databases typically. In some cases, we found instances where, say, a parent object might get deleted, but not correctly delete its child object. So there may be some dependencies that are left orphaned there. That is something that we've addressed in later builds. We've done a lot to ensure that we maintain good referential integrity. Now, these types of problems don't actually present problems themselves, but what we've done is we've introduced some validation in our newer versions to ensure that there are no orphaned objects, there are no duplicate objects, there are no problems within the database. Now, that validation didn't exist in older versions like R6, so often if that condition presents itself, then it's apparent when we try to import databases into newer versions like R12.5.2. And what we're simply doing is trying to point out where there are problems in the database that need to be fixed. A lot of times what I recommend people do is take a copy of their database, run it, and say an XPS import validate only against the policy store, and execute that validation to return where those objects could reside. What we can do is fix the orphaned objects and invalid links and what have you, and ensure that those problems don't get imported into your new target environment. It's something that can be easily done, but one that we don't necessarily think about until we're doing an upgrade or a migration and start running into problems. And it's good to know that we have those. It's good to know that any potential problems were addressed ahead of time, so something to be aware of. Of course, like with any migration or any upgrade, backup, right? That's going to be very, very important. And one thing that we find people tend to overlook is the supported configuration matrices that we have published and support online. That always make sure that the version we're upgrading to is going to support all of the components in our environment. SiteMinder being middleware, we touch a lot of components, LDAP directory servers, RDBMS databases, operating systems for various components like web servers, web agents, policy servers, even the web servers and OSs that they're residing on where our web agents reside. So we want to make sure that we've looked at all the components and are within the supported configuration settings, if you will, of the version we're upgrading to. So some things we definitely want to keep in mind. And lastly, encryption keys, policy server encryption keys. This is basically what we're using to encrypt the sensitive data on the policy store. These are our SiteMinder administrator passwords, our 4X agent passwords, our directory and ODBC database administrator passwords, shared secrets for trusted hosts, what have you, all encrypted using the policy server encryption key. In-place upgrades don't typically cause a problem here, but we need to make sure if we're doing a parallel upgrade, especially where we're having a parallel upgrade with policy servers that potentially connect into the same policy store, that the policy server encryption key is the same on all the servers. So we don't want to find out that we've got two different policy servers encrypting data with different keys. So it's something we want to make sure we have a good handle on prior to an upgrade.
And that's something that we find that very often, previously, someone installed this machine, this environment, years ago. The encryption key is lost, and now I want to do a parallel upgrade, and now that presents itself a problem. It's not an insurmountable problem. There's ways to recover and change that encryption key, but those now have to be steps to be performed in order to enable a parallel upgrade because that encryption key was lost. So we find things like that a lot, and a lot of these things sort of create a lot of confusion, create a lot of problems, and in many cases can create a lot of frustration around the upgrade process. And really, they're more like prerequisites to the upgrade process than actually the upgrade process itself.
Aaron, you actually brought up two good points there that I'd like to key in on. One, yes, each of these can potentially be frustrating when we're not prepared for them. However, each of these is also extremely easy to fix. They're extremely easy to, especially if we do our due diligence and sort of dot our I's and cross our T's prior to the upgrade. Each of these is very easy to address and resolve. Just making sure we sort of go through this checklist really takes away a lot of the frustration on the back end when the actual upgrade occurs. That's what we've found to be the case time and time again.
Yep. Okay. Let's see. The other thing to keep in mind is if you're upgrading from 1251 or to 1252, this doesn't really apply. When you're upgrading from older versions of SiteMinder, whether that be 12.0, even 12.5, the Federation Key Database, which used to be a series of flat files that you would actually use to manipulate for Federation purposes, that would store all the Federation public and private keys through your Federation agreements, used to be in a flat file on the operating system. So it had to be copied to each and every policy server in your environment. That is now stored in the policy store. So if in an in-place upgrade, that will automatically get sucked in and gets read and gets put into the policy store all automatically. In a parallel upgrade, that's actually another step that you've got to do because you've just installed a brand new SiteMinder policy server that doesn't know about that key database, and nothing got actually migrated into the policy store. And this can cause challenges with some of the Federation partnerships. So there's a tool you can run to just migrate the key database in, SM Migrate CDS or Certificate Data Store. But that's actually something that just another one of those things we have to remember. Keeping in mind that key database that I'm referring to is the Federation key database, not the key store for SiteMinder. The key store for SiteMinder is normally part of the policy store. It's a completely separate thing. So some questions. If I was going through and I was doing an upgrade of my SiteMinder environment and I was a SiteMinder administrator in a large organization, these are what I would start to think of myself. Do I keep the same architecture and policy store data, or do I want to do a new environment? Do I want to start clean? Do I want, maybe it's time for a server upgrade. Maybe my servers are going off lease and I need to get new servers anyway. Maybe I want to change operating systems. Maybe I was using an old Solaris system and now I want to go to a much more modern Red Hat, for example. And things along those lines. Also, I mentioned earlier, as I'm working with a couple of large organizations now, and we're intentionally not just exporting all of the policies over from their previous environment to their current environment. Instead of what we're doing is we are migrating individual policy domains over one by one, and what that's going to allow us to do is it's going to allow us to basically leave the old stuff that is no longer applicable behind. How else do I trust my backups? A Unix system is relatively easy to back up from a SiteMinder perspective. You can just take a tar of the entire folder. Windows systems are a little bit more complicated with the registries and things like that. But how well do I trust my backups? Because if you're doing a parallel upgrade, you're not really touching the existing servers at all, which means you always have something to fall back on. If you're doing an in-place upgrade and something doesn't work, let's say I've got 2 policy servers and I do an in-place upgrade on one of them and it doesn't work, well, I'll have my agents going to the other one anyway. So I'm not going to have an system-wide outage. But what that means is while I'm upgrading that one of those policy servers, I no longer truly have an HA environment going on in my network. So keep that in mind. And backups are important, and rollback strategies are important. And what are those steps going to be? I'd love to say every single upgrade the first time through works perfectly. I've been doing this long enough to know that that's not always the case for 1,000,001 reasons, some of which are our fault, some of which are completely outside of our control. But take a look at that. And also, after I upgrade, or even ask the question, why am I upgrading? And then after I upgrade, what new stuff can I use? I hate it when organizations go through a lengthy upgrade to upgrade SiteMinder, and then you know what? They don't leverage any of the new stuff. It's kind of, they don't feel that they have any value out of the upgrade process. At the same time, I feel that, we're spending millions of dollars doing new development on SiteMinder every year. They're not taking advantage of all that they could be taking advantage of as well. So, that's one of the key areas is, if by leveraging the new stuff, you're getting value out of the upgrade, you're continuing to get additional ROI out of the software purchase that was made years ago. So I'm going to walk through here just a high-level in-place upgrade. Documentation has some of these steps in it, but what I found is by actually just walking through it, it sometimes makes a little bit more sense. This I'm assuming from like a SiteMinder 12.5 or environment. So I'm not going to get too crazy about some of the keys and things like that, the key database. But basically, you see here I've got 2 web agents that are 12.5, talking to 2 12.5 policy servers with a 12.5 policy store, a UI, and a report server. Pretty vanilla environment. Obviously, most organizations' environments are a lot more complicated than this. But these are the sort of the main building blocks. In early, years and years ago, those of you who've been doing SiteMinder for 5, 10 years plus, you would actually start in different places of the upgrade process. Now, the first thing you do is you run the installer for 12.5.2 and upgrade a policy server. And that's the first thing you do, is just install and upgrade those bits. Likewise, we already mentioned all the different checklists. Once you feel comfortable that that's actually running and working in your environment, then what I do the next one. Now, I'm not fully upgraded at this point. I'm not even close to fully upgraded, but that is the bulk of what we're actually doing. We follow that by upgrading the policy store. And really that isn't necessarily schema changes that, historically it was actually, you'd actually go in and add object classes and attributes and add tables and things like that into the database. It's not necessarily that anymore. It's much more of loading the data dictionary, the new data dictionary for the new elements that we've added since that version since the policy store version that you currently have was released. After the policy store key store is done, then it's UI time. Now, and you could install it that way, do it that way, and just upgrade the existing UI, or you could just install the UI server on some new box as well. This is where you get these hybrid worlds where, in many cases, you might do in place for some elements and parallel for others. You have to do the UI after you do the policy store, and that's really the key element. If you're using the report server, now it's time, and you upgrade that. And again, that sometimes people do that in parallel, even if they've done a policy server in-place upgrade. And lastly, we do the web agents. Basically, I typically don't make a big business issue of going through and touching every one of my web agents immediately after I upgrade the components. Typically, I look at trying to upgrade the agents when they're doing a new release of that application, or when they're doing some maintenance on that web server anyway, and trying to get as part of that stream. Web agents, in order to use much of the new functionality, you need new web agents. But also, in order to use some of this functionality like session assurance and federation, you don't necessarily need every web agent to be upgraded in your environment. And, in short, that's not a very hard process. I mean, yes, you have to do individual components, as long as you remember all of those prerequisites that Stephen and I went through earlier. Likewise, if I had the same environment and I wanted to do a parallel upgrade, and what you'll see is if by doing this it gives me additional levels of redundancy as well, but also allows me to migrate operating systems and hardware and things like that. First thing I do, I start by making sure I've got a brand new SiteMinder 12.5.2 policy store in a directory or database. Maybe now you want to use CA directory because CA directory now comes with SiteMinder. If you want to use it as a policy store, no additional charges, things like that. And I connect the 12.5.2 policy server to that new policy store. In order to enable single sign-on, and between the new parallel environment and the existing one, I'm going to want to share the same keys that are used to encrypt the SiteMinder sessions. So I'm going to have my 12.5.2 policy server connect to my older key store. And this can be done even if in the old environment it's a policy store, key store all combined. But basically, by having my policy server connect to my old key store, I will have the same exact encryption keys, which means the SiteMinder session that's valid in the old environment will be valid in the new environment as well. And that's my basic infrastructure. After that, I can drop down in 12.5.2 UI and start creating some policies in the new 12.5.2 environment. Let's say I've got a new 12.5.2 web agent that's going to come in and connect into that new environment that's brand new. And now we get to the point where, I need to want to start migrating some of my existing applications over to my new environment and then sunsetting some of my older components. So the first thing I forgot the report server. I apologize. So that really is can be a one-time thing. It could be a multiple-time thing. It all depends on your procedures and how you're doing the upgrade. If you wanted to take the entire policy store, export it out using the XPS export commands, and then import it into the new 12.5.2 policy store using XPS import, you can do that just fine. Or you can do it on a policy store or a policy domain by policy domain level. The thing to keep in mind, like we mentioned earlier, when you're doing the SMOBJ import into 12.5.2, we do a lot more validation checking on the data. So, if there was an orphaned object that was not causing any harm at all in the older policy store, if we were to export that out and try to import it, the import command likely will actually throw an error and complain about that orphaned object. So that's data that has to get cleaned up before we actually do the import. It doesn't mean that, your upgrade has, stopped. It just means that, we want to clean up the, you put garbage in, garbage out. That's not the goal. We want to be doing more validation checking and more schema checking along the way on that data. So, it's a process to actually, if you do have some challenges in that data, it does have to be cleaned up. Once that's all taken care of, that's a one-time process. Well, let's assume it's a one-time process for now. I can immediately start taking web agents that are existing and putting them into the new 12.5.2 policy server. And really, that involves editing the SM host object to put the new policy store, the host configuration object, and that involves editing the web agent on the web agent side to get the new connect to my new 12.5.2 server as a trusted host. That's the nice part is if something were to go wrong, I can take that 12.5 web agent and point it right back at that 12.5 policy server again, and figure out what was going on and happening. So that's one of the reasons Untitled Upgrade does give you some additional flexibility. As I add and put in more web agents, I can even take out my first older policy server out of the mix. And once I feel comfortable, I can actually literally just delete it and re-image it, put it back in inventory, whatever. And I can continue to do that with the different pieces. The last step, well, there's only two more steps in the mix, and that is taking my key, now based on this, is taking my keys, either taking them out of my older environment and putting them in the new environment, or some people just generate new ones, and there's actually two main keys that are in there. There's the agent key and the session ticket key. If you're using any of our SiteMinder password services and a few other features, the session ticket key really definitely has to come over. Otherwise, you can actually lose some things like your password history. The agent key is just used to encrypt SiteMinder sessions. So in some cases, if you're not using password services and you're willing to, you know, in some maintenance window, just basically force everyone to log out and log back in again, you may not even need to export the keys over. Again, it's one of those things where depending on what you use, you may need some additional steps. Once that's done, that new policy store becomes a policy and key store. And, you know, as your needs fit, you can upgrade the web agents. That said, I've got some organizations that don't upgrade their web agents, like I said, unless there's an update to that particular piece or there's a need. Because while you may have 4, 6, 8 policy servers in your environment to manage, organizations might have 100, 200, 500, 1,000 or more web agents across their infrastructure. So, you know, I consider web agent upgrades not necessarily to be part of my core policy server infrastructure. Also, when we talk about, you know, a lot of people have been afraid of end of service announcements and support. The SiteMinder 12.0 end of service announcement clearly called out the web agents themselves were not part of that. So, you know, we still support those older agents with the newer policy servers. And there we go. Obviously, you know, after the upgrade, we're going to want to review some existing settings. There may be things that need to get adjusted in the new environment. You may find, you know, for example, maybe you need to, you know, manage and play with the thread setting or other settings a little bit, because as, you know, over time, we've, you know, done different things with some of those settings in order to optimize performance. Obviously, leverage existing functionality or new functionality. You know, like I said earlier, it kills me when someone goes through a $500,000 or $1 million project that lasts from, you know, 4, 5, 6 months, depending on the size of the environment, and they don't actually see any value out of it. There's value there. There's a lot of new stuff that's been added. Let's use it. And also, start planning for more periodic updates. Like I mentioned earlier in the build strategy, every somewhere in there is, I think it's every 2 to 3 months, we're doing new bug fix patch rollouts. If we plan on that as part of an ongoing health of our system, and about putting some of those in a more regular basis, the next upgrade will be a lot easier because it won't be as big. We want to try to move away from big, heavy upgrades to much smaller incremental ones. They might be more frequent, but they might be easier. And we're seeing that today. I mean, customers of ours that are upgrading to 12.5.2 from, let's say, 12.5.1 are having, you know, doing this upgrade much easier than, let's say, a customer that hasn't touched their environment in, you know, 8 years and is still running SiteMinder 6 and now trying to go SiteMinder 6 to 12 to 12.5.2 because essentially they're skipping over, I think, 4 major versions in that upgrade. So you know what? Things have changed a lot over those times. Some additional resources that you can actually look at and leverage. Obviously, the documentation The documentation site changed over time. It is now hosted on the wiki.ca.com site. You go in there, you can actually find the SiteMinder documentation pretty easily. You don't have to even log in if you don't want to. And you can do some searches and whatever. The cool thing is, if there's something that's not clear in the documentation, in the bottom of every page, you can fill out a form highlighting that. Say, you know what, I was looking for this and couldn't find it, and I thought it was going to be on this page. Or, you know, the steps illustrated in this particular step are not clear. I'm confused by, you know, this. And you can actually put that comments right directly into the doc. It's available for you to see. It's available for everybody else in the world to see. It's also available for our documentation team, which actually will try to get back and even answer and respond to it in a timely manner. Also, the community site. The community site, obviously it's hosting this webinar, but it's a great source of way to talk through things with other people. And actually, it's a great host of just general information and history about what's going on. Also, the support site itself, what we call the SiteMinder product page. Great place to go for all of your, you know, links to your platform support matrices, downloads for bug fixes, etc. Excuse me. And also, also you can sign up on our proactive through the support site. You can sign up through our proactive notification site. And this is actually interesting because what we can do is we can actually start sending more information proactively about SiteMinder out. For example, we had the latest CR fix. We published it when we were going to release it. We thought we were going to release it at the end of January. You know what? It went into, I think, the second week of February. We actually published a note saying, you know, those of you that are looking for this, there's been a little delay. It's coming. And then when it was released, we actually went out and told people about it, that it was released. We're also looking into using that when there's, you know, a specific known issue that's affecting large numbers of our customers, using that to publish more information out to you so that you get it. And, you know, it's like every single email list. You can set up to subscribe and unsubscribe, and there's different levels. And it's actually a really good service to be able to get more information. Rather than having to go look for it, we're sending it directly to you. That said, Kristen, I think we'll open up for Q&A.
Okay, great. Yeah, so if you want to ask a question, I know I've seen a few questions come in the Q&A window during the presentation, and Chal has been in there from support answering some of your questions. You can also ask questions in the chat window, or you can ask a question over the phone line by clicking #6 or *6 to unmute your line. So let me see if we have any questions in here queued up so far. And also, if you think of any questions that you might have after this WebEx, you can ask them in the CA security community. If you go to ca.com/talksecurity, you can see where you can ask a question, and someone from the product team will get an answer to you. Okay, so it looks like we have a question from Mike Mulligan. Does the wiki contain an official upgrade document?
Yes, it does. One of the SiteMinder books is actually an upgrade doc. It actually goes through and it talks about in place and parallel. It's got some diagrams, kind of similar to what I did, but of course they don't build. But it's, step 1, step 2, step 3 in that document as well. I was going through it when I was actually building this because I wanted to make sure I used exactly the same steps that were documented. I did notice 1 or 2 oddities in there that I'm going to follow up on as well. Mostly that the picture might say something, but what was in the picture wasn't necessarily represented the same in the words. So I did notice that while I was actually prepping for this conference call that I'm going to follow up on. But yeah, there's a full upgrade guide.
Okay, great. We also have a question from Tim Potter. Can we address mixed mode?
Mixed mode, or address mixed mode. meaning mixed mode, obviously between different components. Was there a
Well,
particular?
I suspect he may be talking about FIPS compatibility that was introduced in R12 and our ability to run in either FIPS basically like a mixed in FIPS only mode. It sounds like maybe asking that question. I'm not sure.
Okay. He said different policy server versions.
Ah, okay. I see. Okay. So in one of the examples, Aaron was showing where you might have multiple policy servers connected to a policy store, and the method or mode was to start upgrading the policy servers first. So you would want to upgrade the policy servers themselves before you upgraded the policy stores, for example. So like all versions, the policy servers are backward compatible with the agents, so that's not really an issue. 12.5.2 policy servers still support R6 agents, for example. But really the key is when you're dealing with multiple policy servers, ideally you'd like to get them all upgraded at the same time, but the last step you would take would be to upgrade the policy store itself. So any data dictionary changes would occur after the policy server binaries themselves are updated.
Okay, great. It looks like we have a question from Amit. Aurora. Amit, I added you to the phone line. Make sure you're unmuted by pressing #6 or *6, and then we should be able to hear you.
Yeah, hi. So can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Yeah, I have a couple of things actually. I did recently done an upgrade from R6 to R12.52, and main problem we are facing is the import-export issues from R6 to R12.52. The main problem which we are facing is we can actually, when we export the data and when we try to import it, the XPS import throws a lot of errors. So without resolving those errors, I think I cannot import the stuff into R12.52. And I don't know a way to correct all that data because those errors are enormous. So I want to know two things. Can I skip that kind of checks and just import the data as it was imported in R6 because I know it is working in R6? And second, what is the mechanism to correct those errors actually before importing that data into R12.52?
So the first part of the question is there's not currently a means to skip the validation process of the import. However, if you're having problems determining what the errors mean and determining how to resolve the errors, then CA support will be glad to help you with that.
Yeah, no, actually, what happened when I was doing all that, I reached out to CA supports a lot of times. And, the kind of errors, I gave them my whole export and tell them, tell me what should I do with this data. I want to import it in my R52 because I'm getting so much errors. They were actually, I didn't find the answers which can be helpful for me to correct those errors or import them in my R12.52. Ultimately, what I did, I actually took domain by domain, and I just exported one domain, imported that domain, and did things like that, which was very cumbersome for me. But now my problem is now I have R52. My new problem is when I try to migrate data from one environment like testing environment to staging, I have still same problems. If I export my data using XPS export, and when I use XPS import, I get those validation problems which I cannot resolve them, or at least I don't know how to resolve them because they are too much, and I don't have a way to skip them, and I don't have a way to ask someone to tell me what should I do with this data.
There should be no reason why you can't ask. I am CA support, and I'll tell you that if you open up a case with us, we'll be happy to address that issue for you.
So if I give you the summary of errors which I am getting, can you tell me what should I do to get over them and import the data successfully?
Yes, but this wouldn't be the appropriate forum to do so. But yes, I'd be able to help you with that.
Okay, fine. That's fine. But one thing, I think the skipping of that validation can be a good option, right? If I know this data is working in R6 and it is working in R12.52 also, only the problem is the way we are importing, exporting is creating some problems. So would there be any way in future where I can skip that kind of validations?
We've actually debated that a little bit. The decision was made that we don't want to provide that for a variety of reasons. One of the things that we are researching is providing more tools that will read the policy store data, understand why it's failing, and give you options to be able to clarify and remediate right there.
That's the key right there.
But catch here is my policy store is actually 10, 12 years old, and it is working fine. And I'm really nervous to do something with it. It's very old store, and 40 million odd users are using it. So for me, it brings the nervousness to tamper with that kind of data.
All right, I'll connect. Amit, I will connect you with Stephen offline so that you can chat more about this over email. Does that sound like it would work better for everyone?
That would work great. Yeah, that's a good idea. I'd be happy to help.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I just want to make sure that we get to some of the other questions that we have coming into the Q&A panel right now. So, Amit, I'll send you an email after this webcast connecting you with Stephen and Aaron, okay?
Okay, fine, no problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, great. So we have another question from Phil. The installation doesn't offer CA directory as an option to use as a policy store during install. Is there another script that initializes the CA directory as a policy store?
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, that's Steve. Go ahead.
Well, I think what we're talking about here is the policy server configuration wizard and the automated process of configuring policy stores. And in some cases, such as CA directory server, that is not an automated process for the wizard, and we'd have to follow the manual steps within the documentation for that particular directory.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and there's technical reasons why that is. The fundamental technical reason is CA directory right now does not allow you to modify the schema within it via the LDAP protocol by making LDAP queries to it. And that's actually the mechanism that's done. So there's actually some technical reasons as to why we don't. However, what we have done to try to make some things easier, there is a script that one of the field guides actually developed to basically try to automate that process a little bit more. And that actually is available on the community site in the scripts and tools section. So, you're more than welcome to take that script and try to play with that if you're trying to automate that process a little bit. As well, it's provided really as an as-is example type basis. But, you're more than welcome to try that as well.
Yeah, and if you go to the security community, again, it's at ca.com/talksecurity. On the overview page, the link to scripts and tools will be found on the left-hand side if you scroll down under related links. All right, another question. Is there a detailed document available that describes the differences between R12 and 12.52?
The best place for a detailed, there's probably two things I can think of. The first is actually in the 12.52 release notes. There is a What's New section. Also, when we released 12.5.2, we did a webinar that introduced the new features, like we do with almost every version. In that webinar, we went through some of those major versions as well. So there are some things there. That said, Kristen, you know who asked that question, and I apologize, I forgot the name already.
Sanjay.
Connect me with that person. Sanjay, connect
okay.
me with Sanjay offline, and Sanjay, I'm more than willing to go through some of that with you.
Okay. Does anyone have a question over the phone? If so, go ahead and press *6 or #6 on your phone to unmute yourself, and you can ask over the phone. Okay. Looks like we have some more questions in the chat window. From Jim, is Linux ENV, can we copy encryption key.txt from original servers assuming same FIPS mode in case you don't have original master key?
Steve, what is your philosophy on that?
Yeah, in some cases you can copy the key over.
However, I believe now in some of the other, if you're going from Windows to Solaris or Windows to Red Hat, you can't. And there's other situations where you can't as well. So it may work. It's probably the best guidance I can give you online. I don't think that we officially support or would say, as a procedure, copy that key over. Because I believe in even some operating systems, there's some pieces about the operating system thrown into the key as well. So your mileage may vary. To just give you as an incomplete answer as possible.
No, that was actually fairly comprehensive, Aaron. I mean, the challenge here is that, and the answer is we don't officially support it because we can't support it on all operating systems, because it won't work on all operating systems. So unless we can support it across all platforms, then we can't make that statement. So really the recommended method to ensure that the keys are the same if you don't have them is to export the policy store in clear text, manually change the encryption key on your policy servers, and then import the policy store in clear text again. And what it'll do is it'll decrypt the sensitive data during the export. You change the policy server encryption keys and all the policy servers to be the same. And when you re-import the policy store, it encrypts it with a new policy server encryption key, and then all policy servers can encrypt, decrypt, and read each other's sensitive data without any issues. And that's the official supported means of doing it. In some cases, you can copy the file. That was done a lot in the past, but like I said, we can't officially support that process because we can't support it on all OSs or guarantee that it works, between platforms.
Okay. Jim said thank you. Okay, so another follow-up question from Phil, and it may have been, oh no, sorry, not from Phil, from Tim. It may have been answered already, but just to confirm, is it true that the 12.52 policy store will not communicate to a 12.0 policy store?
It's the other way around. A 12.0 policy server won't necessarily be able to read from a 12.52 policy store, but a 12.52 policy server can read from a 12.0 policy store. So the policy server to policy stores are backward compatible, where the higher versions of the policy servers can read from the older versions of the policy stores within reason. So it really has to be something on the R12.x platforms, basically. So R12.52, for example.
Okay. Okay. Chal has been doing a good job at answering most of these questions. I'm just making sure that there are no unanswered questions at this time in the Q&A window. All right, it looks like we have everything answered right now. So I'll send you guys a transcript of the Q&A in case you need to follow up with anyone via email after this webcast. Again, if anyone has a question that wasn't answered in today's live Q&A, you can ask it in the security community, or just respond to the email. I'm going to send a follow-up email to all attendees, and you can just respond to that email with your question, and I will make sure it gets to the panelists. So thank you, Aaron and Stephen, for presenting today, and for Chala for your help in answering everyone's questions. I'm just going to go to the next slide. So, yeah, like I said, if you go to the security community, you'll be able to ask a question there, and those are some of the other products you can ask questions about as well. But here is, Aaron, go ahead to the last slide so they can see your contact information in case they want to reach out to both of you. So that's, we'll leave that slide up here just for a couple minutes in case anyone wants to write down their email addresses. So thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Stephen. And thank you, everyone, for attending today.
Thank you, everyone.